Polio is a viral disease passed through food or water that is contaminated with the virus. It could also spread directly from an infected person to another, and it was particularly active during the warmer months of the year. Polio devastated the young, hence one of its names is infantile paralysis, though adults could also contract the disease, as occurred in the case of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who contracted polio in 1921 when he was 39 years old. FDR later became the 32nd President of the United States, elected to 4 terms of office, serving between 1933 and his death in 1945, all along while hiding the extent of his paralysis to avoid the public ramifications of the cultural stigma against physical disabilities at the time and the perceptions of inadequacy. His strength in office clearly contradicted such perceptions, but the deception continued. Reflecting on changing attitudes over the decades, note the presentation of FDR at the FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C. that was unveiled in 1998, 5 decades after his death. During his recovery, FDR established a treatment and rehabilitation center in Warm Springs, Georgia, in 1926, designing this as an early site for universal access for wheelchair users, and thinking about the center as supporting the whole person and not just the disease, considering their social and emotional well-being along with their physical condition. In this sense, Warm Springs was ahead of its time, but in another sense, it was very much limited by it. While polio afflicted children of all races, access to Warm Springs was restricted by race, serving only white people, until it was racially integrated after FDR's death by his widow, Eleanor Roosevelt. 90% of those infected became ill but recovered, but for another 10%, the virus made its way into the bloodstream and then to the spinal cord, resulting in muscular paralysis that would become permanent, as you've already seen from the course reading and other videos. While polio is an ancient disease, the epidemic hit the United States at the end of the 19th century and then continued through the first half of the 20th century. It took the medical community decades to understand the nature of the virus, and the unknowns prompted much fear and anxiety in the general public. Quarantines were enforced for families which contracted the disease. Individual children were removed to isolation wards in hospitals. During outbreaks, communities closed places of public gatherings, recreation facilities like public pools or theaters, even schools. Parents feared for their children's lives and well-being and often kept them at home. And the scientific community sought a cure. In the meantime, they worked to mitigate the effects of the disease. And this led to the invention of an artificial respirator that kept thousands of polio survivors alive. This was known as the iron lung. They also created modified wheelchairs and improved braces. There was scientific and technological developments in response to the debilitating disease. But to stop the virus, a vaccine was needed. Scientists worked diligently to understand the disease and to find a cure. In 1938, FDR founded the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, and that's now known as the March of Dimes, to raise funds for research to support those who were stricken by the disease. The foundation helped fund the work of Jonas Salk, who developed a vaccine which, in 1954, underwent a human trial to test its effectiveness and its safety. The University of Michigan ran the test, and the U.S. government approved the vaccine in 1955, and vaccinations began, resulting in the elimination of the virus in the United States in the early 1960s, and it's largely been eliminated around the world since that time. And it should be noted that Jonas Salk intentionally did not patent the vaccine, foregoing any possibility of profiting financially from it so that it could more easily be available throughout the nation and the world. As an addendum, UC San Diego students may note adjacent to the campus is the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, which was founded by Jonas Salk in 1963 and continues on in the path of medical research. Now, as we have seen in this course, polio survivors are among the disability rights champions that we've covered in our course, including Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann, as well as Justin Dart, a prime mover in the passage of the pivotal civil rights legislation in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, about whom you will learn shortly. And let me add to our list the historian Paul K. Longmore, who helped develop the field of disability studies. He was a faculty member at San Francisco State University. He became the director of San Francisco State University's Institute on Disability, which is today known as the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability.